Hi, all listeners. So good to be back. Um, Exciting new session ahead of us, and I'm extremely excited to have Shayle Kann from Energy Impact Partners with us today. Hi, Shayle.
Hi there. Pleasure to be here.
So we, as a fund, met Shayle and Energy Impact Partners last year in San Francisco at Bloomberg's New Energy Finance Conference, and kept in touch since. Shayle is a renowned writer, author, speaker on the future of energy. He's running his own podcast on energy called Interchange. Interchange, highly recommended. Fantastic insights. And super excited to talk to Shayle today. So. Um, he has he's still pretty young as an investor, but he's done so much that it will be really hard to fit even part of his life and his journey in the energy in this 1 hour chat that we have with Shayle. But Shayle, I want to start from pretty early, probably from college, and talk about the way and why you got into the energy sector. So I definitely wanna touch even things before the green tech media.
Sure. Well, I discovered energy and climate in college, as you suggested. I was in Southern California. I went to a college called Pomona College, which is
Yeah,
like a really small liberal arts school near Los Angeles. And
yeah,
um, I was a psychology major,
yeah,
the psychology of perception and cognition at the
yeah,
time, and took one class called Strategic Natural Resources, which I read Dan Jurgens' book, and I like discovered climate change, and found some weird passion for it. And then I took a second class on public utility regulation, which was taught by this ex-regulator from Southern California Edison. He was on the government affairs team, the regulatory team there, and I, to my own surprise, found that I was actually interested in utility regulation, which,
hmm
nobody's interested in utility regulation. So those two
Were
things
you
told me,
worried
okay, maybe there's
about
something.
yourself when you figured out you were
Yeah,
interested in this?
it was a very confusing time for me from an identity perspective. But I was always sort of taught to just like follow the things that the threads you want to pull on,
Yeah,
from a curiosity standpoint. So I did. Ended up tailoring that major. So I ended up studying the psychology of energy and behavior, which is sort of like really small esoteric field of psychology that's trying to ask questions like, what are the types of interventions you can do to get people to actually change their behavior with regard to energy? Um,
yeah,
Ideas that came out of things like that. So, for example, O Power, one of the few big tech success stories, was basically based off of some of that literature. Not that it was to do with
yeah,
me. So I discovered in college, and without really meaning to at that time, ended up pursuing since been an entire career exclusively dedicated basically to energy, but through a bunch of different lenses.
yeah. Okay. So you went to college. You went to even work for a regulator. You went to work for CPUC for a while. I think, as I read, you sort of realized maybe that wasn't the thing you want to do for the rest of your life. It's a very specific industry, very specific profession. I know you got a Fulbright scholar and you went to Australia, but that was during a very interesting time during the financial crisis when it hit. So, I heard you've been doing stuff there, but definitely didn't settle down in Australia for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah. So after college, like you said, I worked at the California Public Utilities Commission. I got experience on the regulatory side, which is invaluable, like
Yep.
really, really, really valuable, even through to today, but absolutely not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I also spent a little bit of time doing renewable energy credit and carbon market origination and trading, which was in the wave of
Yep.
when those markets were taking off in the US. And then, yeah, Australia, originally to study one thing to do with energy, but instead I got there and the credit crisis hit. So this is
Yep.
like 2007, 2008.
Yep.
And so instead I spent a year basically trying to figure out how wind projects were getting financed in Australia when when all capital dried up, and these are like the most
Yep.
capital intensive assets
Yeah.
you've got. So that was it ended up being a really interesting exploration and just fun to spend a year in Australia. But yeah, I came back after the end of that year,
Yep.
still in the midst of the credit crisis, sort of late
Yeah.
2008, beginning of 2009.
So is that when you joined a still pretty small 10 people team at Green Tech Media?
Yeah. Yeah, so I came back from Australia and I had decided this is still in the heyday of the first wave of clean tech venture capital. So I decided I wanted
Yeah,
to be a clean tech venture capitalist.
yeah.
Um, and I ended up, by some odd series of events, talking to one clean tech VC firm at the time who said, well, look, we're not hiring right now, but you should talk to one of our portfolio companies, this company called Green
Mm-hmm.
Tech Media, which had just raised their first institutional round of capital. They were very small
Mm-hmm.
at the time, like you said, around 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you should talk to them. And so I ended up meeting Scott Clavena, the CEO and founder. And it was in some ways like I hadn't thought about it, but it turned out to be a perfect um, fit for my set of skills and my experience. So I ended up joining GTM and running GTM Research, which was the market analysis
Mm-hmm.
business housed within Green Tech Media. And yeah, long story short, that ended up being an 8.5 year long run that really defined, I think will always have defined the rest of my career.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that was as a big part of your career, and I think that's where you really got your name as a Shayle Kann, as expert. I know you spent so much time on the solar industry, on the really technical parts of it, and you know, the folks and the experts were waiting for what thesis you will get, what you're gonna spit out to the market. So definitely super forming times, and well, it kind of finished successful in a way, right? It got acquired by the Wood Mackenzie folks, the big firm, the Verisk Analytics. Was how did that feel? It was, you know, it was like your baby, right? You spent so much time. You helped build a company to where it really gained a lot of importance in such an important and big market in the United States. How did that all feel? Was it, did you leave right away, or did you spend a few more years going for the integration with the larger corporate?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I will say now being in the venture capital world, I find it extremely valuable having been through that process at least once. And in
Yeah.
fact, I was sort of through it twice because we got acquired into Wood Mackenzie. And then while we were in Wood Mackenzie, we made another acquisition. So I was on both
Right.
sides of an M&A
Right.
transaction.
Right.
That experience is really valuable because it feels like one thing on the outside, it's a whole other thing on the inside.
Yeah.
It was a it was a truly a mixed bag. We were, like I said, we were a venture backed company, so there was always an exit on the horizon, right?
Mm.
That was always an
Right.
expectation. And if we were successful, we thought it would be a good one. So it was successful, and uh, to that end, it was a culmination of exactly what we had been working for
Yeah.
all these years, and I felt really great about it. On the other hand, you know, you lose a large measure of control.
Yeah.
Typically, I struggle with that generally in my
Yeah.
life. But also, you no longer control things like the culture and and how decisions are made and how much visibility you can provide your team and all of that. And so it was really a learning experience for me. I stuck around for a little over a year after
Hmm.
the acquisition. So we were acquired mid 2016. I stayed through late 2017 and then left. And
Yeah.
that was like the most informative time in my career, just learning how to navigate this. We were 65 people or so when we got acquired.
Oh
Verisk
wow.
Analytics is 6,500 roughly.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was a big change, and figuring out how to navigate that and how to make sure that we sort of like set this business off on solid footing
Right.
was a real task for us. But
Right.
ultimately, I do think it was the right move, not just because it was a good financial exit for us, but also because Wood Mackenzie has an enormous global footprint, and uh, I think for GTM to ultimately have the kind of impact that we were hoping that it would, the scale that Wood Mackenzie presents, and
Yeah.
all the surrounding intelligence that they've got around the rest of the energy sector, which we were not expert in,
Yeah.
is sort of invaluable. So figuring out how to operationalize that is hard, but the vision, the long-term vision, I think is right.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely not the only example in your former industry, right? Even the Bloomberg New Energy Finance folks, 2009 acquisition by Bloomberg, really took it sort of to enable them to take it to the next level and be more broad everywhere. Um, I want to touch one fascinating story I read in one of the interviews about the viral stats. I heard you guys at some point in time at the GTM research, you had a bet with your colleagues about viral stats gonna go, whose stats gonna go most viral. And can you tell that story to the listeners? It's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we were in the business, GTM Research was in the business of market intelligence, right? So, the
Yeah.
process of doing that, we were gathering a ton of data on the market, a lot of which was proprietary and nobody else had. So, we were just like a fountain of interesting statistics, particularly about the solar market at that time.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how it started, but at some point, my colleague MJ Shao, who was sort of my deputy and was running our solar research for us, and I made a bet about who could create a more viral statistic. And so we each published like articles based off of a single stat around solar. I actually don't remember what his was, but mine
Yeah.
was that at that time there was a new solar installation in the United States every 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Just like, this is before meme was a term everybody used, but type of thing that would become a meme in small nerdy circles. And so we both published it. Both of the articles went like minorly viral from a GTM
Yeah.
perspective, but nothing big happened until my my parents, who are sort of old school progressives, uh,
Yeah.
my mom forwarded me an email from one of the like progressive organizations to which she subscribes called MoveOn.org
Yeah.
that cited MJ's statistic. And so it seemed to me that was a clear win. My mom had forwarded me an email using MJ. So I conceded my loss and lost the battle of the viral stats
Yeah.
until I think like a month later or so,
Yeah.
completely surprisingly to me, President Obama used my statistic in the State of the Union address. And then I started getting all these calls from fact checkers. This is what's
No
changed in the
way.
United States, which is back in those days, if President Obama said there's a solar installation in the United States every 4 minutes, a bunch of fact checkers would jump on that to see if that's actually a true
No
statistic. And so
way.
I got a bunch of calls from fact checkers and could happily state that
Wow.
it was a true fact. Imagine if every time our current
Wow.
president said anything that might or
Wow.
might not be true, a fact checker
Yeah.
jumped on it
You
that
need
way.
another 10,000 fact checkers employed immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. That is fascinating. Look, so you had this fantastic, long, fruitful journey with GTM. You went through the integration again. Extremely fascinating learning experience. Then you, I guess, sat down with maybe less things to do than you had at that 8 years and a half with GTM. And you can do a lot of things, right? I'm sure you had people calling you, had different offers, different industries. You could have gone many different ways. What How did you go through this decision making process, and how did you arrive at the EAP at the end?
So it wasn't as well thought out as you might imagine, but so after the acquisition and the integration, I knew it was time for me to move on and do something new. It had been, like I said, 8.5 years, a long time.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had accomplished largely what I had set out to accomplish. We had a successful exit. We were in a bigger platform. And so, I knew it was time to leave. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. So I left in November 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? 2016. Anyway, I left, purposefully not knowing what I was going to do next. And my intent was to take a fairly long sabbatical. I wanted to
Yeah.
learn to surf and,
Yeah.
find myself and maybe take on a little bit of consulting work to just stay
Yeah.
stay in touch with things, but largely not do anything. And
Yeah.
so I did that for a very brief period of time. And then sort of relatively quickly, without intending to, I met Hans Kobler, who's the CEO and
Mm-hmm.
managing partner of EIP, and pretty quickly fell in love with EIP's model,
Mm-hmm.
which is unique. And
Yep.
the I guess the short version of it is, first of all, I had had this idea around being in venture capital and in my
Yep.
bones since pre GTM. I hadn't really taken it seriously again, but what had happened in the interim is I had seen the boom and bust of clean tech venture capital that
Yeah.
had occurred since my original interest, right?
Yep.
I saw it all fall apart basically.
Yep.
And then along comes Energy Impact Partners, which, I'm sure we'll get more into it, but the brief
Yep.
description of EIP is that it's a it's a large venture capital fund, one of the largest in the world, focused on the energy sector, that is backed predominantly by electric and gas utilities. And EIP's model is to work with those utilities much more as partners than just investors in the fund,
Mm-hmm.
to try to drive actual meaningful um, sort of impact it from the perspective of finding great companies, startups, and then helping them to navigate the electric utility sector, either by
Yeah.
working directly with utilities or partnering or channel or market entry, or whatever it might be. And
Yeah.
that really appealed to me because I had seen enough in this sector to realize that this has been one of the fundamental problems with clean tech from a venture capital standpoint. It's been very difficult historically to make a good, successful VC business in a space, in significant part because the startups did not know how to work with the incumbents. And so EIP's model is just a really unique spin on that. And so,
Yeah.
I got really excited about that.
Yeah.
I thought it was solving a lot of the problems that I had seen over the years, and so ended up joining 3 months after I left GTM, which was much shorter sabbatical than I had meant to take,
It
which I
sounds,
have
I
some
gotta say,
regrets
it
about.
sounds pretty classic. You hear all those sorts from the folks. Well, yeah, sold my business. It's gonna take 2 3 years. Then 2 weeks later, you get a call it's like, hey man, this is super exciting venture and building. Do you want to join? It's like, oh my god, cool. I'll meet you on Monday at the coffee shop. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's do
it's
it.
exactly that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I also will admit, it turns out I'm not exactly the kind of person who like does well with a long sabbatical with nothing to do. I think I was driving my wife crazy. So
There we go. Cool. So how does your role look like at EAP right now? What it looked like, sort of what was the vision when you coming in, right? You came with an insane amount of knowledge, very much from a sort of research point of view. Now shifting to the investor mindset. Again, I love your thesis. I love the maps, the sort of ecosystem that you often post, the Medium post, extremely insightful and so detailed. But can you talk a bit more with listeners about what specifically you do at Energy Impact Partners, or sort of investment role we have? I'm sure we have a sort of research role as well, given your background and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, part of what I discovered entering this world is that my background, which is not unique, right? Like there are lots of folks who have a market intelligence, market
Yeah,
analysis type background. It's not so dissimilar either from like a management consulting or strategy
totally.
consulting background. It provides, I think, a really useful framework to a lot of venture capital is, uh, you find something, a company, a sector, a subsector, whatever it is, and then you just need to sprint up the learning curve on that as fast as possible so that you can
Yeah.
gain conviction in one direction or another, whether an investment is worth making. And the thing that I find really useful about the market intelligence background is it provides a really valuable framework for how do I think about understanding a market quickly, the structure of that market, the competitive landscape, where
Hmm.
it might be heading, what the major drivers of success or failure are going to be. So that stuff all provides, I think, a really valuable set of experience. But that has to be married then with a lot of more sort of venture capital domain specific knowledge and experience, which I definitely didn't have. I had been on the other side of the table. We had raised
Hmm.
money at GTM, but I wouldn't call that the same as, having had the experience that sort of, career long venture capitalists do in, for
Hmm.
example, things like structuring deals. Um,
Yeah.
so there's definitely a lot of learning to do there. What's been interesting is, so I've carved out a somewhat unique role at EIP, which is
Hmm.
sort of a hybrid role.
Hmm.
It's exactly what you described. So part of my job is I run a small team that we call research and strategy, which is dedicated to doing all of EIP's sectoral analysis, thesis development. We often are the tip of the spear in a new sector. So if
Hmm.
there's something that EIP that our utility partners think is strategic and we think is investable,
Yeah.
we'll do deep dives in that and try to understand the landscape so that we are positioned well if and when an investable opportunity comes along. In that
Right.
process, we're also doing a lot of the work with the utilities. So
Hmm.
we serve as part of the bridge between these big incumbents who've invested in the fund and the startups that we want to invest in. So
Right.
that's a part of my role with the team
Hmm.
that's really fantastic. And then the other part of my role is on the investing side, looking for great deals, particularly my interest predominantly is around decarbonization.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, I'm looking for opportunities that meet our mandate, but are will help us solve climate change. So
Right.
it's fun to, and those two things play off of each other. Obviously, a big part of the
Totally.
research and strategy team's function at EIP is deal sourcing.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
so when it works really well, EIP has built this machine that I think is super powerful.
Right. So how much of it, maybe it's all of it, is thesis driven, that and the thesis is coming from Shayle's team? Is does it does it work like that, that your team comes up with, I don't know, with the thesis, with maps out all of the companies in the in that specific ecosystem, and then your folks, yourself, you just go out and then speak to all those entrepreneurs and you decide, hey, these two companies are the champions that are investable, and that EAP is going to put their money to them? Or is it is it different? Is it much more complicated? And then the whole interaction with the utilities, do they sort of almost stress test those startups that you bring to their table of the 15 or 14 utilities and that you have? How does it play out?
So I guess I'll answer the last part of that first, which is the
Yeah.
utility part. So one of the things we like to do, we have a lot of regular touch points with all these utilities. It's
Yeah.
part of the way that we're trying to solve this historically challenging problem is we build relationships up and down the organizations throughout these utilities so that when the time comes, um, we can help them innovate throughout the
Mm-hmm.
organizations, and in particular help them innovate by connecting them with really exciting technology companies. So part of the way that we do that is when we are in diligence on a company, often early in diligence, we like to, though we don't have to, we like to give that company an opportunity to come present in front of
Mm-hmm.
our utility partners. Either that'll be in front of our sort of core group of partners,
Yep.
who are responsible often for like strategy or corporate development, or if it's more specific, for example, we know all the cybersecurity leads at all of our
Mm-hmm.
utilities. If we're looking at a cybersecurity company, we'll absolutely bring that cybersecurity company to come in and pitch. And that's valuable on all sides, right? It's valuable for the company, the startup, because it's at worst an opportunity to present in front of a bunch of potential customers.
Yep.
It's valuable for the utilities, either they find something new they can adopt or they just learn something new about the market. It's valuable for us because it's part of our diligence. We can find out whether we might actually be able to deliver value to the company if we invest, and whether a bunch of customers think it's a valuable solution. So we definitely try to do that. To your original question about thesis driven, I found this to be really interesting, being inside venture capital relative to what I felt like on the outside. I think I had a sense on the outside that VCs, if they say they're thesis driven, they
Yep.
really mean it. They like go deep on a sector, understand everything about it, come up with a thesis that's like the type of company that is going to succeed is exactly X, and then they go find that company and they invest in it, right? And I
Yeah.
just don't think that's not what it actually means when you
Yeah.
talk about thesis driven. The
Yeah.
types of I think what we do is we find sectors that are highly strategic and investable.
Mm-hmm.
We try to become the world's foremost experts in those sectors. Um, and we try to construct a narrative around what's happening in these sectors. Where do we think it's going? What is the competitive landscape? And where are there opportunities?
Yep.
That all does not lead us to say then, okay, so our thesis is X and we're going to invest in that thesis. What it
Yep.
does put us in is a position such that we know what we're looking for, we know what we're not looking for, and we can
Mm-hmm.
relatively quickly come to a decision on any given company. But the
Right.
reality is, as every venture capitalist says, to a point that it really annoys me, but I'm going to say it
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
you're betting on teams as much as you're betting on technologies or products. And so the
Totally.
reality is you could be as thesis driven as you want, but at the end of the day, you got to really fall in love with an entrepreneur.
Totally. Totally.
So I think all you can do is you can put yourself in a position to gain conviction more quickly because you have all this prior body of knowledge around a sector.
Right. 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 But sort of what you're saying is, given all your wealth of research and knowledge, for you guys, it's pretty quick to say, hey, if a startup comes in working in a specific sector of subsector of the industry, say, hey, look, thanks guys for pitching. We looked at it. We spent a lot of time on this subsector. We know it very well. This is not something we're gonna invest. this year, next year, over the next 5 years, unless there's like dramatic changes, right? It's sort of what you're saying. You can pinpoint and say, hey, this is exciting. We want to look at this sector X. No, we're not going to touch. It's not for venture, and we don't believe in this.
I would say it's actually pretty rare that we say as a blanket statement, we will not invest
Mm-hmm.
in this sector because it's not for venture. There
Okay.
may be a couple exceptions to that, but I think more often what we have is valuable context,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're a next generation battery chemistry company,
Yeah.
right? We have a lot to say about what it would have to take for
Yeah.
that company to be successful and
Yeah.
for us to be willing to place a bet on it. Like we have a universe of information behind us about the challenges of scaling up a new battery
Right.
chemistry. And
Exactly.
so that doesn't mean we would never do it, but it does mean that we can set the bar appropriately pretty
Right.
quickly.
Right. Understood. Okay. Let's. We touched EIP. I want to dig in a little bit more. It's not a typical venture capital firm, as Shayle has described. Um, you also have a variety of strategies there. You have venture, you got growth, you got credit. You started having infrastructure. I think you just done a first deal in infrastructure in the United States. Um, can you talk to the listeners a bit more about it? I have to admit, I didn't have you guys having so many strategies before starting researching it. I knew you were a very, very large firm, very big inventor, and I heard about the credit, but infrastructure was definitely news to me. So can you also talk about how this all interrelates? Because the strategies, can seem at first different, very different, sort of little overlay and so on.
Yeah, I could see how it would be not obvious from the outside. We
Mm-hmm.
we have big ambitions. We
Yeah.
intend to make a big dent in the world, and so we're doing a lot to achieve that. So, the sort of core of EIP is a venture capital fund. So EIP in total, we have about $1.5 billion US under management.
Yep.
Um, the bulk of that has come from what is now two core venture capital funds. First fund was a $530 million fund that we finished investing new dollars out of in last fall. And then simultaneously, when we finished investing new dollars out of that fund, we launched our second core fund.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the money comes from those funds. So those are upwards of $1 billion between the two of them, and that's where we have now I think close to 20 utility holding companies that are investors in the fund, about
Mm-hmm.
represent about 80 operating companies.
Wow.
What the other thing that we did, so that's the bulk of what we do, and that
Mm-hmm.
is stage agnostic venture capital. So we're
Mm-hmm.
anywhere from typically Series A through like a pre-IPO type
Mm-hmm.
round, um, and check size varies accordingly.
Yeah.
The other thing that we did in the first fund that will continue is this credit fund. So we realized that there's a whole class of companies, particularly in the energy sector and in clean tech, that may not be exactly the right fit for venture capital, or maybe are the right fit for venture capital, but are not the right fit for our capital. However, they have a different set of needs. They need to they may need debt and not equity, or they may need a
Yeah.
different structure of capital. So we set aside a portion of our fund, got it matched by the U.S. Small Business Administration into what's called an SBIC fund.
Mm-hmm.
And that presents us the opportunity to make a different class of investments, predominantly credit investments, debt,
Mm-hmm.
but we can also do some equity out of that fund as well. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
second pillar.
Yeah.
Third pillar is Europe. So most of our LPs in the main fund are based in North America. We've also spun up a smaller but very similarly structured effort focused around Europe. We have a fantastic team based in both Germany and the UK
Mm-hmm.
uh, that are doing that effort, and that's so with European utility investors and European portfolio companies, and it's the same model just placed in a new region.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then so the most recent one is infrastructure, which we just made the first announcement around last week, which was we announced that we helped to finance a 100 megawatt plus portfolio of community solar projects. And the short story behind that is that one thing that we've noticed is a lot of our portfolio companies being in the energy sector, they have the infrastructure needs They
Yep.
are either building infrastructure themselves or they need infrastructure to enable what they're doing. And typically, for almost by definition, because these are venture capital backed companies, what they're doing is going to be outside of the commoditized world of like utility scale renewables financing. And so the result is they're first of their kind projects, or early on, there's still kind of a dearth of financing opportunities, or sorry, a dearth of sources of
Mm-hmm.
financing
Yep.
for those types of projects, and it ends up being pretty expensive for them. And having
Yep.
noticed that, we'd like to help our portfolio, and we think this is just an opportunity in the market. So we hired a really fantastic, small, nimble team to go hunt for just a very specific set of really strategic infrastructure opportunities for us. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the first one. We're really excited about it, and there will be more announcements to come on
Okay.
that front.
And so Europe, correct me if I'm wrong, at least European team, was that something of a new thing? New being a year or so ago. I heard you guys were building a team. And the second part of the question is infrastructure obviously just started. You're definitely going to test the ground in the US, see how it works. Are there plans, you think, to do infrastructure in Europe at some point in time as well?
And the first question, the European effort is newer, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been a long time making.
Yep.
We've had demands for it from we've seen a lot of portfolio companies. We actually invested in a couple of European companies in our first main fund. So we've already seen that there's like a lot of activity in Europe.
Yep.
Sometimes there's a better, you can get better valuations.
Yep.
There's some places in which Europe is obviously and clearly ahead. Vehicle
Yep.
electrification being an obvious example of that. So it's been in the planning stages for a long time, but the
Yep.
actual fund is obviously newer.
Mm-hmm.
As far as infrastructure goes, I don't have a great answer to that. Um, it's not in the immediate plans. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think. We still have a lot to do
Yeah.
to figure out where our infrastructure effort is going to sit in the broader ecosystem and what it's going to look like in North America. Um,
Yep.
so not immediately. Someday, who knows?
Okay. Switching the topics a little bit, you also have coined a term uh, called grid edge. You based on the fact that you didn't like the term smart grid. Any new terms coming our way, Shayle, that you coining while at home?
So I will note it wasn't just me who coined the term grid edge. It was a team of us at GTM, but it was true. So like we had a whole practice around smart grid, right? When smart
Yep.
grid was the term everybody was using starting in, I don't know, 2010 or something like that. By the time 2015 rolled around, that term was losing steam. And I also think just wasn't reflective of the stuff that was exciting that was going on, which was more around distributed energy resources and their integration into the grid. And smart grid wasn't really meant for that. Smart grid was meant for distribution automation and smart metering and things like that. So
Yeah.
we, just out of desire to have a term for things that we wanted to spend time on,
Yeah.
coined the term grid edge, which then took off and has become fairly popular, I think, ever since. I will say personally, I think grid edge is losing steam now, and that term is dying. It's had a good run, but I think we're going to stop talking about it. I don't have any new terms to coin, but I do think that it's already true that the term that is supplanting grid edge in the lexicon, I think, is grid flexibility.
Right.
I think we'll
Right.
spend the next 4 or 5 years mostly talking about grid flexibility.
Look, Sheila, I'll do my best. I'll try to revive the grid edge in Europe somehow. I
It's
promise
had
you
its
that.
time. It's had a great life. I think it's fine to sunset it.
That's cool. I want to touch upon the recent blog post as a reply to Mark Andreessen's "It's Time to Build." You write a fantastic post on "It's Time to Build" in the energy industry. Had a lot of shares, a lot of reactions by the folks, and I loved it. It's such an insightful piece of work. How did you come up with that? What was sort of in your head? Just read Mark Andreessen and say, "Hey, look, this makes sense."
Well, what happened was, so Mark Andreessen wrote this piece over the course of a week. He published it on the weekend, on like a
Yeah,
Saturday, called "It's
yeah,
Time to Build," which I'm sure most folks who are listening
yeah,
read or heard about. um, it elicited a variety of reactions in people. What happened to me was I read it. It's over the weekend, and my first reaction was to get really annoyed because it only has one passing reference to energy or climate change, and that passing
Yeah.
reference is basically saying energy experts say that 100 nuclear plants could power the entire United States.
Yeah.
Why don't we just build those effectively?
Yeah.
And being an energy person,
Yeah.
I know enough to know that that's
Yeah.
not the solution. I'm not anti-nuclear. I'm all
Yeah.
for nuclear. It's just not the only solution.
It's not
And so
that
my
simple,
it's
Mark.
not that simple. Yeah. Um, so my first reaction was to get annoyed about that. But then, of course, Mark Andreessen is smart enough to know that there were going to be a lot of people like me who are going to get annoyed about the individual things that he
Yeah.
said. So
Yeah.
the end of his piece is basically a call to action. Like, look, if you disagree with me or you have other thoughts, give me your own ideas on what to
Yeah.
build. So I took that to heart.
Yep.
And over the course of like an hour and a half, I was like, well, I wonder what you would build if you were just trying to come up with like an exhaustive list of what to build to decarbonize.
Yep.
And so off the bat, I just came up with this like 35 item list and
Yeah.
published it without really thinking more about it.
Yeah.
And then it you
It
know
blew up. Yeah.
gained some steam.
Yeah.
But what was interesting after that is that then I got a lot of people who um, commented to me about Mark Andreessen's piece itself and whether it
Yeah.
was really like worth touting in the way that I was touting it, which,
Oh wow.
upon further reflection, it is tricky.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate timing for Andreessen Horowitz in that he publishes this big piece on building big stuff, and then
Yeah.
they do this deal in Clubhouse, which is like the
Yeah.
next, like social app.
That's exactly what we discussed in the office. Sounds so you so you read the post, you come out as like, oh my god, this is really visionary. You get so excited and passionate, and then next day you read the new investment of such a large investment, and you're like, wait, hold on, what did I just read? Is that how does it how does it work, Mark?
Right. Now, to give him credit, I think his response, though he's not been very good at responding to people's criticisms of this,
Yeah.
his response probably would have been, "Yeah, we intend to fund stuff like Clubhouse, and
Yeah.
we also want to build."
Yeah.
So, I'm waiting to see will either Mark Andreessen himself or Andreessen Horowitz, start to invest in more things that are building big stuff, particularly big physical stuff.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
see.
I'm gonna ask a question you're gonna hate. Everyone asks you that. I want to talk a little bit about the trends. And I know you talked about decarbonization, digitization, decentralization trends for years and years. But some of our listeners will have not read all the things you said, all the smart things you said. So could you talk a little bit about these trends that are just happening all at the same time, but also any new exciting trends that Shayle see at the industry?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the terms everybody uses, decarbonization, decentralization, digitization, those are all real.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I would add a couple to them that I think now should be included. Unfortunately, they don't start with D, so you lose the
Yeah.
alliteration. But electrification should be added in there, obviously, and I would argue resiliency should be added in there as well. It depends where you are, how important this is. But I, for example, I live in Northern California in PG&E territory.
Yep.
Wildfire season is upon us basically here. And I lived through the proactive power shutoffs the last 2 years. Resiliency is a huge thing here. I think it's going to become an increasing thing everywhere because we're going to see more and more prevalence of
Right.
larger natural disasters. So those are high level trends. I do think that we maybe have gotten a little overly enamored of those trends sometimes. For example, though I am a big proponent of decentralization in the electricity sector, um, I think that like decentralization for decentralization's sake
Mm-hmm.
actually doesn't have a lot of value, and I think that's where we've gone a little off the rails. For example, I'm not the biggest believer in peer-to-peer energy networks. I'll just say
Mm-hmm.
that. That's gained some people have been excited about it. There's been some venture capital investing. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
some listeners who are going to get mad about
Yeah.
hearing me say that.
Yeah.
I'm yet to get convinced of the need and what purpose it ultimately serves in and of itself, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
context of if you're trying to create a microgrid that's islandable because there's outages. That's a
Yep.
different thing.
Yep.
But I do think that though we are seeing decentralization, uh, it doesn't mean that anything that decentralizes energy is inherently better.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I do think those trends are all real. The other one I've been spending some time on lately that intersects the energy sector, but not exclusively the energy sector, but I think is really interesting, is in basically investor pressure leading corporates to take action on some combination of sustainability, carbon
Hmm.
reduction, and ESG, environmental and
Yeah.
social governance issues. It's a still relatively newfound phenomenon, and it's becoming incredibly powerful. Like the
Hmm.
funds flowing into ESG linked securities
Yep.
are astounding
Yep.
and not abating during this COVID crisis. In fact, accelerating.
Yep.
And that is starting to have a real meaningful impact on the share prices of a lot of companies. And thus downstream of that will start to have an impact on their behavior. The problem is it's a mess. It's a total complex mess. There are hundreds of independent ESG ratings providers.
Yep.
There are multiple reporting frameworks that disagree with each other. Different ratings agencies will offer the same company vastly different ratings. Even the notion of ESG as a single concept is kind of flawed. Like your classic example here is Tesla,
Yeah.
right? Where, so let's separate E, S, and G. On E, environmental issues, I think it's hard to argue that Tesla should be among the, if not the top company in the world,
Yep.
right? Incredibly powerful. Social issues, there's some debate, right? Tesla has some
Yep.
labor issues at its manufacturing facilities, but say they score okay there.
Yep.
And then governance, which is largely about like what checks do you have around senior leadership, how strong a role does the board play, things like that. Tesla quite obviously should not score high.
Yeah.
So if you're
Yeah.
trying to come up with a single ESG score for Tesla, how do you do it?
Totally.
So I think that that's a trend, but stepping back, like ESG is a big deal now. I think it actually isn't fully accounted for any public company,
Yep.
and I think it's going to animate behavior in some really interesting ways.
Right. I want to interrupt you on so many points. There's so many great points you mentioned. I don't remember all the places now, but I just had your quote, which sort of touched a little bit on the consumer behavior in the energy space, where you said that um, you said that you're very skeptical on startups that rely on getting consumers to spend a lot of time a lot of their time explicitly thinking about the energy, and that the people pay little attention to energy. Was the number was like 8 minutes a year on total or something like that. Um, I guess no change in sort of the word you hate thesis here, right? You don't invest in startups that would focus on that particular segment.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, there's some nuance to that, right? Like, I think so. There's this trope that in people spend like 8 minutes a year thinking about their electricity bill. I think it's
Yeah.
actually more than that, but it's tough to get capture a lot of attention. Now, that doesn't mean you can't build a really big successful business off of changing consumer behavior
Yep.
or that needs consumer action. It just means that um, I think it's really difficult to get high engagement, high constant engagement
Yep.
around energy issues. Now, that might be changing. There's a
Yep.
generational divide here, and particularly millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
They appear to be far, far more concerned from a personal standpoint about climate change. So
Right.
that may change. Um,
Yep.
but there's lots of platforms that have built, big successful consumer platforms that can do something at scale around energy or climate that don't require consumers to dedicate a ton of their waking hours to that.
Yep.
So if you can make it really seamless and easy for customers to do something, particularly if you can operate things autonomously and in the background, um, then people really do want to take action because there's a big significant portion of the population that
Right.
all things equal would rather feel like they're contributing positively to the fight against climate
Right.
change. It's just a matter of figuring out how to get them to actually act and how not to ask too much of them.
Right. So so great. So talking about the consumer, if I if if I'm a person, and it's a it's a personal question. If I'm a person, I don't know you, I don't know the way you live. I read about you online, I check out your podcast, I look at your LinkedIn profile, which is full of energy, energy experience. I would imagine Shayle lives in a house with a Tesla, a
Oh no.
EV home charger, a battery, a smart thermostats everywhere, solar panels on his roof, super uh, super high tech and stuff. Is that the good depiction of how he lives?
You're about to call me out on all my personal failings. No, generally that is not how I live. I live in Berkeley, California. Um,
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to live in a very particular climate wherein and the way that my house is set up such that we actually don't have any heating or air conditioning.
Oh wow.
Um, which is, in the winter sometimes we regret the heating part of that. But
Yeah.
from that perspective, our house is pretty energy efficient. Um,
Yeah.
we do not have solar yet because we just bought this house 2 years ago and we need to replace the roof soon. But when
Yeah.
we replace the roof in a couple of years, we're gonna get solar, 100%.
Good.
We have a good south-facing, non-obstructed roof, so
Yeah.
we're a good candidate. And California's good economics for residential solar.
Yeah.
And I currently drive a Prius that is old, and so we've been just like putting off getting a new car, but are absolutely going to get a new car. Can't decide yet whether it's going to be a plug-in hybrid or
Yeah.
a all electric at this point, but
Good. Well, you
one of the
made some
two.
you made some promises here. We're gonna come back. I'm gonna come back to you in 2 years. Check on the progress here.
Fair.
Um, so on one or so final question, then we'll move to a few questions from the audience. It's a hard question. You definitely don't want to offend any of your portfolio company CEOs, but any of the favorites in the portfolio that you have, that you just love the startups?
They're all my favorites,
Yeah.
obviously. um, I can name a couple that I'm particularly excited about.
Yep.
I'll name one that's in the energy industry. And the other thing I'll note is that EIP's investment mandate is somewhat broad. So we invest in companies that are strategic to the future of utilities. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
always mean we invest in energy companies.
Yep.
We invest in lots of companies that have some application in the utility sector or some strategic relevance to
Mm-hmm.
utilities, right? So I'll name, one company that is purely an energy company, one company that is not.
Mm-hmm.
The energy company is Arcadia, formerly Arcadia Power. It's a consumer-facing platform, so this will go against my previous statement to some degree. That basically takes over the bill pay relationship from a utility, replaces it with a really beautiful, intuitive experience for customers, and offers them, depending on their geography, a variety of options to go green. So anything from renewable energy credits to community solar to a whole host of other potential things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what Arcadia has figured out is that there is a way to actually engage consumers around energy and climate. If you deliver them a beautiful user experience, they do it at scale. And they've figured out a really clever way to get a big customer base and then to monetize it on the back end. So it's both an impressive business and they're solving what has historically been one of the toughest challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that one a lot.
Okay.
Another one that's not energy related, but is really fantastic for other reasons, is a company called Rapid SOS.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the short version of this is if you are in an emergency, every country has a different number, but if you dial 911 in the United States, the emergency number, until very recently, the 911 system is a messy. It's comprised of like 6,300 individual 911 answering centers. They all operate different systems and software and so on. And so there was no way to send any data directly to them. So
Yep.
instead, what would happen is you would dial 911 and then they would have to ask you questions like, "Where are you?" And that die every year just because of that, right? You call, you get your location wrong, you don't know where you are, you any number of reasons. Um, that is not to mention the fact that increasingly there is a whole variety and bevy of IoT data that's incredibly valuable, or just other data that's valuable for responders.
Mm-hmm.
What is my, what are my pre-existing conditions? Am I on medication? If I'm unresponsive, it's really important for them to know that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you just couldn't get the data
Yeah.
for the first responders. So RapidSOS built essentially the pipes that deliver data from anything on one side, could be an IoT device, could be a database, could be something else,
Right.
directly to first responders in a secure manner. And so for the
Right.
first time ever, because they have partnerships with, for example, Apple and Google, if I dial 911 from my cell phone now, my location will automatically get transmitted to the 911 call center through RapidSOS's piping. Same thing if you're in an Uber. If you're in an Uber and you dial 911 from the Uber app, what it'll do is not only send the 911 call operator your location, but also things like the make and model of the vehicle and the license plate. So all of this it enables a faster emergency response, which saves lives. It's a really, really cool
Wow.
company. It's incredibly difficult to build. It's taken them 7 years
Yeah.
to get this machine running, but now that it's running, it's really cool.
Super impressive. I'm a big fan of Orchidia as well, and I have read stuff on RapidSOS, so it's good to hear you like them. Shayle, if you don't mind, I'm gonna switch to a few questions from the audience. One is with regards to the current crash in the oil prices, which bumped back a little bit, but the listener is asking whether you see it significantly impacting the energy transition to green and sustainable energy.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think first of all, the transition is it's a longer term phenomenon, right? And I think everybody who's listening probably knows, like, we should separate out the impact of oil prices on different sectors.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect the electricity sector, right? Oil is not used in electricity for the most part. So to the extent that new clean energy is competing, it's competing against either natural gas or it's competing against coal for the most part. And those prices didn't see the same crash that oil
Yeah.
prices did. So oil prices don't really affect the electricity sector a whole lot. The transportation sector, obviously, bigger impact. And so the big question there, I think, that we've been grappling with is, what, if any, impact will low oil prices have um, vehicle electrification? And there, I think I don't know is the
Mm-hmm.
answer, but there's not a lot of evidence that. So the way that it impacts vehicle electrification is the total cost of ownership comparison between an electric vehicle and an internal combustion engine vehicle gets worse if gas is cheaper, if
Yeah.
oil is cheaper. There's not a ton of evidence that consumers, like individual vehicle purchasers, are doing this kind of complex total cost of ownership math
Mm-hmm.
in their decision making around buying EVs. Not clear to me that that's actually happening. And the result is that low oil prices may have a minimal, if any, impact on individual consumer behavior around EVs. The one place I think you can make an argument there will be a bigger impact is fleet electrification, because
Mm-hmm.
fleets are doing that kind of total cost of ownership analysis. And so where, say, a fleet might do an analysis and discover that 20% of the fleet could be economically electrified today a year ago, and maybe now it's 10%.
Yeah.
They might actually act on that behalf. So I think it has some impact on the margin, but to me, it doesn't seem like it's going to impact the long-term trajectory. And if anything, particularly in Europe, probably be overcome by government support, which appears to still be strong.
Right. Got it. Okay. Awesome. Um, we wrapping up. Before we do so, want to play a short game called Long Short. I'm gonna read out a statement or just a name of the company or something like that, and you tell me whether you long or short. So only a few today. First one, Tesla.
Oh, short.
Short. Okay. Cool. Oil.
Uh, long, short term, short, long term.
Got it. Hydrogen.
Long, actually. And I've become long over the course of the past year or so. It's taken me a while to come around to it, but I am long hydrogen.
Good. Nuclear.
Short.
Short. Okay.
Yeah.
The last one. I love this one. Current stock market prices.
Man, if there is one thing I past
I
3
knew
months.
it.
It's that
I knew it's gonna be this reaction.
I don't know what the hell is going on in the stock market. Cannot come to terms with it. I mean, I want to say I'm short, but
Yeah,
like I was wrong about that 3 months ago. So I don't know. I'd be wrong right about it today. No
I'm the
idea.
I'm in the same boat. So, look, last question that we ask our speakers like yourself: how and when and at what stage of their startups entrepreneurs should get to know you, should contact you, say, hey Shayle, look, I'm building this fantastic startup, a company. I want you to pay some attention to it, spend some time on it. When should they reach out to you? How should they reach out to you? What's the best way?
So when, like I said, we're stage agnostic, but we typically invest in companies that already have some product and revenue and customers. Doesn't have to be a lot of any of those things, but we're
Yeah.
not typically investing pre-revenue. Um, so I would say, anytime is good to reach out to us, good to get to know folks early, but generally, the right time to start seriously trying to engage with us is when you're starting to go to market with your first customers. The And after that, we're always happy to build relationships over long periods of time. And whether or not it's going to be the right time to invest right away, we're happy to to start to build relationships. Um, how to reach out? Feel free to send me an email if you'd like. My email address is just my last name at energyimpactpartners.com. I can't promise to be like the most responsive person, but I'm working on it. Um, so you could do that, or find me on social media, anything like that. I'm happy to engage. And I'm by nature an curious person, so if you're doing something interesting, I will be interested to learn about it.
Yeah. And I encourage all the listeners to follow Shayle on LinkedIn, on the Medium. He posts quite frequently. And definitely subscribe to the podcast Intern Change. I discovered it this week. I already started listening. The last episode is fascinating. The greed is good. The barbarians at the gate. Loved it and became a new fan. And look, Shayle, I want to thank you for this fantastic 1 hour you got to spend with me and the listeners. Great to have you on the show and really appreciate you coming here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to listening to the next ones.
Perfect. Thanks, Shayle.